Hey over there, Joe Lunchbox.
And Joey Nightingale.
And today we have landed right here in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, today's video is going to be historic. Now, not like in an epic type way, like historic, because it's about history. And you see, Guns N' Roses said, "We don't need no civil war." But the South disagreed with that. And on April 12th, 1861, shots were fired from Fort Johnson at Fort Sumter, starting the Civil War. And that's what we're going to go to right now. We're going to go take a tour of Fort Sumter, see the national park that's there now, and explore it. So step right up. Let's go for this ride. So the interesting thing is, with Fort Sumter, it is a national park. But to get there, since Fort Sumter is on an island in Charleston Harbor, you have to take a ferry, and that's run by Fort Sumter Tours, which isn't part of the National Park Service. But it's nice. There's a snack bar. I got a cup of coffee, get caffeinated, start the day. And that's what we're doing. We're on the boat right now, heading there. We're looking at some other sites as we're going. Like here's another fort that was used in the Civil War, built in around 1809, 1810. And the Confederacy in December of 1960 took over it when they saw Union troops moving to Fort Sumter. We're just hearing the history about it. And it is a nice boat ride. We got some storm clouds on the horizon, but we're not going to let that damper our day. We got a little closer view of that other fort that we were telling you about. Behind these buildings over here is what would have been Fort Johnson on James Island. Fort Johnson is where the Confederates fired upon Fort Sumter from on that day, April 12th, 1861 at 4:30 in the morning. They said little remains of Fort Johnson. It was built in the 1700s and then 1790, and then little remaining. The Confederacy built it the third time, and they were secretly stashing arms. And it was actually used at one point. There was a telegraph line, which I think is interesting, going a mile and a half from there to Fort Sumter.
Ahead of us is Fort Sumter, a powerful symbol of one of the greatest challenges this country ever faced. One of many forts constructed along the Atlantic coast by the Federals.
Since this is the entrance into Charleston Harbor from the Atlantic Ocean, you see so many of these big freight ships making their way in.
This was still a U.S. Army base after the Civil War. It was built in 1899, mounted two large rifles that were capable of firing 1,000-pound rounds over 8 miles out to any attacking battleships at the turn of the century. They were never fired in anger.
An interesting thing is, since we are the first ferry to the fort, all the Parks Department people are on the same ferry, so we have to wait for them to get off, get to their workstations, and then we could go, because there's no other way to get here. Setting up the dock for us to get off the boat. And you can see the Parks Department people waiting doing their jobs. Tell us about the fort. It's really interesting what we were just being told. I knew that Fort Sumter, after it got attacked, surrendered after 34 hours, but I didn't know that before the Civil War there was only 1,600 soldiers in the American Army. There's 4 forts around Charleston Harbor. There was only 80 soldiers around those 4 forts. It makes you wonder. Yeah, it was probably easy to take, because if there was only 80 a fort, I don't know how many were actually here when it was under attack, but there was no way to defend with such few. You can really see that it's all mostly ruins here. They built the museum, a gift shop. That's what the guy was saying. He goes, "Yeah, you have ruins, a museum, bathrooms, and gift shop." But I mean, it's still history, and I like coming to see it.
So as I said, my name is Ranger Jordan, and we are standing in Fort Sumter, the site of the first battle of the Civil War. So during the War of 1812, we fought Britain again, and we won again. But in 1814, the British Navy sails directly up the grossly unguarded Chesapeake Bay into the heart of Washington, D.C., burns down both the U.S. White House and the U.S. Capitol building. After the harbor is about 3 miles wide, the forts on either side, their guns have an absolute maximum range of 1.5 miles, so there's still just enough dead space in there for a skilled ship pilot to make their way in between fire from both forts into the heart of Charleston. So in 1829, a fort is started, Fort Sumter, where we are standing. Now Sumter's built on a man-made island. About 80,000 tons of granite are quarried up in the New England area. And then in 1845, the actual brick fortification is started on top of that. By the eve of the Civil War in 1860, Fort Sumter is still not finished. It's about 85% of the way, and it's never actually completed before the Civil War starts. But the year is 1860. The outer walls are fully constructed, and they're about as high as this red line above me on the flagpole. They're about 50 feet tall. The walls now range between 10 and 20 feet, depending on which wall you are looking at. The slave people working in the brickyards are quite literally making the materials to build a fort to protect a city that at that time saw them as nothing more than property. But the year is 1860. We're on the eve of the Civil War. We're nearing the end of the year, and there are some pertinent events to the Civil War that happen. It's every 4 years. It's the presidential election. Do we know who won the election in 1860?
Abraham Lincoln.
That is correct, Lincoln. And Lincoln would be the secession of South Carolina from the Union on December 20th, 1860. Now, Lincoln is part of the newly formed Republican Party. One of the main goals of this party is to prevent the spread of slavery westward into new states that are added to the Union. But South Carolina, their economy is entirely based on agriculture, on slave labor. 57% of the population at that time is considered property, and they find it completely intolerable to support a man who's not 100% on board with slavery, and they decide to secede from the Union. Now, the North feels like Southern slaveholding policy is being forced down their throat, as well as the reemergence of the fugitive slave law. Pretty much that northern states are now obligated to return freed slaves that have escaped the freedom of the North back to where they escaped from. But the North refuses to enforce this policy, so the South now feels like their freedoms and liberties as slave owners are being stepped on. You've got a powder keg waiting to explode, and that's exactly what happens on this tiny 2.5-acre island on April 12th, 1861. But we're standing where the Civil War started. When I was in high school 10 years ago, I was taught that the cause of the Civil War was states' rights. And if you look at history, it's just not the case. Every state that seceded from the Union mentions slavery as the reason that they're seceding from the Union. But if we take a closer look at South Carolina's, because that's where we are now, their declaration says that there's a geographical line that divides this Union, and all the states north of that line have united in the election of a man to the high office of President of the United States whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. With that clear as dead justification, South Carolina, they peace out from the Union. 6 more states go with them before the war starts, 4 more after the war starts. You've got the 11 states of the Confederate States of America and a war that is raging because of slavery. South Carolina secedes in December of 1860, and Anderson now realizes that he's deep in enemy territory. This is Anderson, by the way. This flagpole is dedicated to him by his daughter, but this is sort of what he looks like. All these kind of can look different. But as he realizes that Moultrie is going to be on that list, as South Carolina now thinks that every federal fort should be turned over to this new Republic of South Carolina. On the night of December 26, 1860, under cover of darkness, Major Anderson and his garrison of about 85 men, they leave Moultrie behind, cross a mile of open water on the shipping channel, and they occupy Fort Sumter here. Now, the next day, 2 days after Christmas, December 27, 1860, they raise an absolutely massive garrison flag up the flagpole. When I say massive, I mean 20 feet tall by 36 feet long. It's huge. You can see it from Sullivan's Island, you can see it from James Island, but it's also a 33-star American flag. Anderson, being stubborn and loyal to the Union and not having orders to leave, pretty much says, no, I intend to keep this fort. But again, no one wanting to start a conflict. They communicate back and forth through the night into the early morning of April 12th, 1861. And Beauregard communicates out here one last time that says, since you refuse to leave, you can expect an attack from us at 1 hour's time. I am forced to fire on you. Now, during that 34 hours, there are no deaths on either side, but nearing the end of it, the Union here in Fort Sumter, the officers' quarters have caught fire. That fire is billowing smoke. You can't see, you can't breathe, but more importantly, the fire is now threatening the powder magazines at the bottom of the officers' quarters. He's realized that he's done the best defense he can given the circumstances, and he wants to give his men the chance to live and fight another day, and he accepts terms of evacuation April 13th, 1861. Alright, so you grab that side, you grab this side. As I walk past unfolding the flag, grab part of it. Alright, so we take this side, pass it over, All right, that's so nice. We do it twice. This side back over here. All right, for those curious, this flag is 10 by 15 feet. So every day at Fort Sumter, we have the unique honor and privilege to raise the flag over the fort every day. If you look out that side, that is one half of the Fort Sumter range, that tower just behind the fort. Back in the harbor, there's scaffolding with a bright light that turns on and off. It just turned off, and it'll turn back on just right now. Those together make up the Fort Sumter range, or navigational light. Per our flag code, we would need to keep a spotlight on this overnight. And to put a spotlight between two navigational lights is usually a bad idea, because it's not every day you get to raise a giant American flag over not just a national park, but the site where the Civil War started. Watch the all right, so every day this flag is raised quickly, swiftly, to symbolize America's quick rise to power among the community of nations. Every day it is lowered slowly to give commemoration to those who gave some or all in defense of our nation. All right, so a little bit of advice to you holding the flag. When you feel it pull away, let go. You can go up with the flag if you want. We'll get you down around 4 o'clock when you leave. But it's not too windy today, so I don't think it'll really hit anyone in the face, because I don't feel much wind. But just watch your faces. I'd much rather this hit me instead of any of you, and feel like when you feel it pull away. Raising the colors.
And you might be wondering why Fort Sumter doesn't have those 50-foot walls anymore if it only got shot upon for 34 hours, that battle. Well, later on the Civil War, this was under the Confederacy, and the Union for 22 months bombarded it to take back it, and it collapsed most of the fort. Now, after the Civil War, this fort was still being occupied, and there was giant cannons mounted atop over here. But for World War II, they needed scrap metal, so they took those cannons and melted them down. And it's crazy, due to climate change, you can see water levels are actually rising, overtaking the beaches that were Fort Sumter. I'm saying there is a museum on the second floor. The Civil War began. I like this. We have a good model of what Fort Sumter looked like the day in April of 1861, before all the damage that we see today when we're here. Interesting map of the succession of the states, and it's interesting that we're in Fort Sumter, and in South Carolina was the first state to succeed from the Union in December of 1860. And it's interesting that then the Civil War started there. This is a diorama of the Confederate soldiers at Fort Johnson firing the first shot, which was more mortar in the air to signal to all the other forts around to start attacking. Here we have a part of the Palmetto Guard flag, which was the first flag over Sumter raised by the Confederates after it took power. They're talking about on April 15th, 1861, following the evacuation of Fort Sumter, Lincoln issued a call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the Southern Rebellion. And because he was calling for this, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas left and joined the Confederacy. Looking at some of the different things fired from the cannon, like a canister here is actually filled with like small iron balls that would explode almost like a shotgun shell. They actually have a 10-foot by 20-foot section of the flag that flew over Fort Sumter in the bombardment of April 12th and April 13th of 1861. And as you can see, this flag actually has 33 stars, and South Carolina didn't like when this was flying because they succeeded, and one of those stars was for them. And like you were saying, this fort was made by The bricks in this fort were made by slaves here in South Carolina. And you actually can still see fingerprints from those enslaved people that made the bricks that actually built this fort. This is a 15-inch Rodman Cannon. This was the largest size cannon used in Civil War, and 2 of these cannons were brought to Fort Sumter as part of the 1870s modernization program. And there's some other versions of the cannons. This little 10-inch mortar model is from 1819. And this would have been the kind that was used on Fort Johnson to make the signal for the other forts to attack Fort Sumter. This is the one that would fire that mortar. And the black structure on the fort was built in 1890 to 1899. Wasn't here in that original battle. The only thing that was the originals that they're saying were all these bricks that we're seeing around.
For years,
I don't know if you can see
fort
them,
was named
but there's a
Fort
bunch of
Moultrie
dolphins
in honor
jumping
of its
up and down
commander.
over there. See,
When Colonel Moultrie needed a flag to represent his
Dolphins?
troops in battle,
yep,
he designed one after his regiment's uniform, with
Back
a
on the
white
boat.
crescent in the upper left.
Since we got here at 9:20 and our boat left at 9:30, the boats are timed, and there's not that many throughout the day, so we bought tickets in advance. We didn't get a chance to go into the visitor center before, so we're gonna check it out now. First thing you see when you come in is a replica of the size of the flag that Major Anderson flew over Fort Sumter. It said it's 20 feet by 30 feet. Okay, so I was mistaken. When we were at Fort Sumter, the flag that we saw was the storm flag. That one was 10 foot by 20. This one in this garrison case is what's left of that original flag that was the 20 by 30 foot flag. And here we have a photo of what remained of this flag that's in this case. It is crazy, that replica of that original 20 by 30 foot garrison flag. You really see how massive. You definitely would have been able to see that from land all the way from Fort Sumter. We're looking at a bugle, and it's crazy when you realize, talking about drummer boys, and during the Civil War, youth as young as 9 years old served in the Army and Navy, often as musicians or cabin boys for both the Union and the Confederate. That's what they call the Civil War, the Boys' War.
It's mourning jewelry. It was jewelry fabricated from like the hair of a lost loved one.
And with 700,000 soldiers lost, I'm sure there was a lot of this made. So there you have it, our historic afternoon at Fort Sumter,
Yep.
here in Charleston Harbor, in Charleston, South Carolina. To me, I thought it was great. I feel the only way people learn is learn about their past to move forward in their future. So going to spots like this throughout our country, to me, is always a good thing. And the fact that I got to raise an American flag on such a historic spot was awesome. If it was just helping, it was still cool. My only one issue with this is, since you are getting on a ferry boat and then taking a ferry boat out,
You are timed.
yeah, it does leave very little time to truthfully explore everything. If we like watching that presentation, trying to see the museum, trying to rush around the fort, it doesn't give you enough time, I feel, to see everything, but it is still worth coming to do and see. So if you enjoyed this history of Fort Sumter, a little bit about the Civil War, you know what you should do?
What should they do?
They should maybe like this video, and if they
that's
want
a
to
good
see
idea.
more, we're all about adventures, oddity, and kitsch, so this is one of those adventures into our history. You could always subscribe to our channel. Let us know other historic spots around the country that you feel we should go see and do a video at. And hopefully we'll see you soon again. So for now, Fort Sumter, been there, done that. Remember, folks, safe travels,
Goodies.
live life. Ribbit, ribbit. We always love when you hop on over to Joe and Joy have landed. Ribbit, ribbit.